You sold our dream house to your 23-year-old girlfriend for $1. I asked, watching my husband pack. He grinned. It's hers now, you can't touch it. I just smiled. He had no idea the deed had a clause that would wipe him out and hand everything back to me. The keys felt heavy in my hand as I stood in front of our dream house, or what should have been our dream house. David and I had spent 3 years planning it, choosing every detail from the exposed wooden beams to the wraparound porch where we talked about growing old together. Now it belonged to Amber, his 23-year-old mistress, sold for less than the price of a coffee. My name is Rebecca Mitchell, and at 35, I never expected to be starting over. But here I was, watching my husband of 12 years pack his bags while wearing the smug expression of a man who thought he'd won. You can't do this, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We built this house together. David barely glanced up from his packing. Actually, I built it. My name's on all the paperwork, remember? You were too busy with your law practice to deal with the tedious details, as you called them. He was right about that part. I trusted him completely with overseeing the construction while I focused on building my career as a real estate attorney. The irony wasn't lost on me. So you just gave it to her for $1? I asked, watching his reaction carefully. His smirk widened. It's a perfectly legal transaction, Becca. You should know that better than anyone. $1 is valid consideration for a property transfer. The deed's already recorded. There's nothing you can do about it. I thought about the document I'd discovered just hours earlier, buried in a stack of construction paperwork. David wasn't as clever as he thought he was, and he certainly wasn't as careful. You're right, I said softly. The deed is recorded. Every single page of it. Something in my tone made him pause. He looked up, his confidence wavering slightly. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I replied, turning toward the door. I hope you and Amber will be very happy here, though you might want to read the fine print before you get too comfortable. What fine print? He called after me, but I was already walking away. Let him figure it out on his own. I drove to my office, my mind racing back to the moment everything had changed. It was 2 weeks ago, and I was working late at my law firm. A colleague stopped by my office, looking uncomfortable. Rebecca, she said, hesitating in the doorway, I think there's something you should see. She handed me a property transfer document, the deed to my dream house, transferred from David to Amber Collins for $1. The date on it was 3 days earlier. I sat there staring at it, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. But shock quickly gave way to determination. I was a real estate attorney, after all. If David thought he could outmaneuver me in my own field, he was about to learn a painful lesson. I spent the next 2 days digging through every document related to the house's construction. David had handled all the paperwork, insisting it would be easier if everything was in his name, since he was managing the build. I'd agreed, trusting him completely. What I found buried in those papers changed everything. The deed to the house contained a special provision, one that David had either missed or never bothered to read. It was common in custom builds in our area, a clause stating that if the property was sold for less than market value within the first 5 years, it would trigger an automatic review by the county assessor's office. But this wasn't just any review. The clause specified that in such cases, the property would be reassessed at current market value, and any difference between the sale price and market value would be subject to immediate tax assessment, payable by the seller. Our house was worth $2.8 million. David had sold it for $1. The tax bill would be astronomical, and it would fall entirely on him. The best part? The clause was buried in the deed restrictions, which transferred with the property. There was no way to undo it without my signature releasing the restriction. I smiled, remembering the look on David's face when I mentioned the fine print. He'd figure it out soon enough, probably when the county assessor's office contacted him about the pending tax assessment. My phone buzzed. A text from David. What did you do? I ignored it, focusing instead on the other document I'd discovered. It was a bank statement showing transfers from our joint account to a separate account in David's name. He'd been moving money gradually, preparing for his exit. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd used our joint account to pay for the house's construction. Every penny spent building that house could be traced back to our marital assets. In our state, that meant I had a claim to half its value, regardless of whose name was on the deed. Another text. Answer me, Rebecca. What fine print? I set my phone aside and pulled up the county assessor's website. Right on schedule, there it was, a notice of review triggered by the recent sale. David would be receiving official notification any moment now. My phone started ringing. David's name flashed on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. Let him sweat for a while. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing documents. A claim for division of marital assets, a petition for emergency injunction to prevent any further property transfers, and a detailed accounting of every penny spent on the house's construction. By the time I left the office, I had 7 missed calls from David and a dozen increasingly frantic texts. The last one read, "You knew about this. You knew this would happen." Of course I knew. I was a real estate attorney who specialized in property transfers and tax law. Did he really think I wouldn't find a way to protect myself? I drove home to our apartment, the one I'd insisted on keeping even after the house was finished, much to David's annoyance. He'd wanted to sell it immediately, but something had held me back. Maybe some part of me had sensed what was coming. As I parked, I saw David's car in the visitor spot. He was waiting by the entrance, pacing back and forth, his earlier smugness replaced by barely contained panic. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he demanded as I approached. "The tax bill. It's more than I make in 5 years." I keyed in the entry code, ignoring him. "That's unfortunate. You have to help me fix this," he said, following me inside. "You can release the deed restriction." "Please, Becca, I'll lose everything." I turned to face him, taking in his desperate expression. The man I'd loved for 12 years, who had betrayed me in every way possible, was now asking for my help. "You already lost everything," I said quietly. "You lost it the moment you decided to give our dream house to your girlfriend. The tax bill is just a consequence of your choices." "I'll contest it," he threatened. "I'll say I didn't know about the clause." I laughed. "Go ahead. You signed the deed. You're a businessman, David. Everyone will expect you to have read and understood the documents you signed. But please, by all means, tell a judge you transferred a $2.8 million property for $1 without reading the deed restrictions. I'm sure that will go over well." The color drained from his face as the reality of his situation sank in. "What do you want?" "Want?" I repeated. "I don't want anything from you. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it." I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside, leaving him standing in the hallway. Through the door, I heard him call out, "What about Amber? She can't afford the property taxes either." "Then I guess she'll have to sell," I replied. "Hope she gets more than $1 for it." I closed the door on his protests and leaned against it, my heart pounding. The first phase of my plan was in motion. David had just discovered the tax implications of his impulsive decision, but he had no idea what was coming next. Tomorrow he'd be served with my petition for division of marital assets. The day after that, he'd learn about the emergency injunction preventing any further property transfers. And by the end of the week, he'd realize that his attempt to hide our joint funds was about to backfire spectacularly. My phone buzzed again. Another text from David. "We can work this out. Please." I made a mistake. I set my phone to silent and poured myself a glass of wine. David was right about one thing. He had made a mistake. Several, in fact. But his biggest mistake was underestimating me. I sat down at my desk and pulled out the stack of documents I'd gathered. Every bank statement, every construction receipt, every transfer from our joint account. It all told a story of betrayal, yes, but also of carelessness. David had been so focused on his affair with Amber that he'd gotten sloppy with the details. And details, as any good attorney knows, are everything. The next morning I arrived at my office early. 3 manila envelopes sat on my desk, the serving papers for David, ready to be delivered. I checked my phone. 5 more missed calls, and a string of increasingly desperate texts from him. The county assessor called. The tax bill is $980,000. Please help me fix this. Amber's freaking out. She can't afford the property taxes. We can work something out. Name your price. I set my phone aside and focused on my computer screen. The county records showed that the deed transfer to Amber had been officially recorded. Perfect. Now she was legally responsible for the property taxes going forward, while David was on the hook for the transfer tax bill. My assistant knocked on my door. Rebecca, your 9 a.m. is here. I nodded, straightening my jacket. Send him in. Marcus Chun, the forensic accountant I'd hired, walked in carrying a thick folder. You were right, he said without preamble. The money trail is clear. Your husband didn't just use joint funds for the house. He's been systematically moving assets for months. He spread the documents across my desk, bank statements, transfer records, investment accounts. David had been planning this for longer than I'd realized. The good news, Marcus continued, is that he's terrible at covering his tracks. Every transaction is documented. He used your joint account as a pass-through, probably thinking that would make it harder to trace. Instead, it gives us a perfect record. I smiled grimly. How much total in diverted assets? Just over $3.2 million, not including the house. The number hit me like a physical blow. All those years of building our life together, and he'd been planning to take it all. My phone buzzed again. Another text from David. The bank is threatening to freeze my accounts. What did you do? What I'd done was file a request for emergency asset freeze as part of my divorce petition. Given the evidence of his financial maneuvering, the judge had granted it immediately. The timing works in our favor, Marcus said, gathering his papers. Most of these transfers happened after he started his relationship with Amber. We can argue this was premeditated fraud. I thanked Marcus and walked him out. When I returned to my office, there was a new email from the county assessor's office. They'd completed their review of the property transfer. The official tax bill would be issued today. Right on cue. My phone rang. This time it was Amber. Miss Mitchell? Her voice was shaky. I need to talk to you about the house. You mean your house? I kept my tone professional. The one you bought for $1? I didn't know, she said quickly, about the tax thing. David never told me. I can't afford the property taxes, and the bank won't give me a loan because... She trailed off. Because you have no equity in the property, I finished for her, since you only paid $1 for it. Please, she said, her voice cracking. I don't know what to do. David says his accounts are frozen, and I don't have that kind of money. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about the young woman on the other end of the line. She was barely older than my youngest sister. Sell it, I said finally. That's your best option. The property taxes are due in 30 days. If you sell now, you can use the proceeds to pay them and walk away with something. But won't David be mad? I almost laughed. David's anger is not your problem anymore, Amber. He used you as a pawn in his game, and it backfired. My advice? Get out now while you still can. There was a long pause. He said you'd try to take the house back, she said softly. That's why he put it in my name. I don't want the house, I replied. I want what's fair. And right now, you're caught in the middle of something that's about to get very messy. Sell the house, pay the taxes, and move on with your life. After I hung up, I sat there thinking about how different things looked from just 24 hours ago. David's careful plans were unraveling, and he was about to learn just how thoroughly he'd miscalculated. The next few days passed in a blur of legal proceedings. David hired an attorney, one of the best in the city, but even they couldn't dispute the paper trail he'd left. Every transfer, every account, every attempt to hide our marital assets was documented. The tax bill arrived exactly as calculated, $980,000 for the transfer tax, due immediately. David's attorney tried to argue that the deed restriction was unconscionable, but the judge didn't buy it. The clause was standard in our area, and David had signed the deed willingly. A week after everything began, I received another call from Amber. I'm selling the house, she said. I have a buyer willing to pay market value. I wanted you to know. That's a smart decision, I replied. David's furious, she continued. He says I'm betraying him, that I owe him loyalty after everything he did for me. She laughed bitterly, as if putting me in this position was doing me a favor. I felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for her. You don't owe him anything, Amber. He used you to try to hurt me, and he didn't care what happened to you in the process. After she hung up, I pulled up the latest bank records Marcus had sent over. David's attempt to hide our assets had left a clear trail, one that would ensure everything was divided fairly in the divorce. The house sold 2 weeks later for $2.9 million. Amber used the proceeds to pay the property taxes and walked away with enough to start fresh somewhere else. I heard she moved back to her hometown in Oregon. David, meanwhile, was facing the consequences of his actions. The tax bill had wiped out most of his liquid assets, and the divorce proceedings were revealing the full extent of his financial manipulations. His reputation in the business community, once sterling, was in tatters. One evening, as I sat in my apartment reviewing settlement documents, my phone buzzed with a text from David. You've destroyed everything I built. I thought about responding, about pointing out that we had built it together, that he was the one who had chosen to throw it all away. Instead, I set my phone aside and looked out at the city lights. The dream house was gone, sold to a lovely family with 3 kids who would actually appreciate it. The life I'd planned with David was over, but something new was taking its place, something stronger, built on the foundation of my own resilience. My phone buzzed again. I never thought you'd fight back like this. That was David's ultimate mistake. He'd spent so many years seeing me as the trusting wife, the one who let him handle all the details, that he'd forgotten who I really was. He'd forgotten that I understood property law better than he ever would, that I knew how to protect myself when it mattered. The final divorce settlement was more than fair, an equal division of assets, just as the law required. David's attempts to hide money had only strengthened my position, forcing him to be transparent about every account, every transfer. 6 months later, I sat in my new office, recently made partner at my firm. The view of the city was spectacular, but what I appreciated most was the sense of peace. The betrayal still hurt sometimes, but it no longer defined me. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister. Saw David at a restaurant yesterday. He looked terrible. You okay? I smiled, thinking about how far I'd come from that moment of discovering the property transfer. I'm better than okay, I replied. I'm free. And I was. Free from the weight of betrayal, free from the need to prove anything to anyone. David had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, he'd only succeeded in showing me my own strength. The dream house was gone, but I was still standing. And that, I realized, was worth more than any property deed.